Before there was memory, before there was breath, there was silence. A silence so vast it swallowed even the thought of time. It stretched across the face of an earth unborn, where oceans had not yet learned the language of tides and mountains, still dreamed beneath molten seas. In that quiet expanse, light wandered without purpose, touching nothing, returning to nothing. The world was not yet awake. It was suspended between being and becoming. The air was thick with absence of sound, of form of witness. No creature yet lifted its head toward the sun, for there was no head to lift, no sun to rise, only the eternal murmur of creation waiting in its cocoon of stillness. Beneath this heavy sky, minerals slept in the deep, folded in layers of fire and stone, holding within them the faint promise of future bones, future thought, future longing. Time itself had not yet learned to walk forward. It drifted like dust in water, spiraling without direction or meaning. 1,000,000 years could pass like a single heartbeat, or a single heartbeat could stretch for 1,000,000 years. It made no difference to the sleeping earth. Yet somewhere in the breathless void between stars and soil, something stirred. A whisper almost too soft to be called sound rose through the dark, a pulse. It was not yet life, not yet will, but it was something like memory, a premonition of movement, of purpose. The world, still shrouded in quiet, trembled faintly with the first hint of awakening. Clouds, faint as ghosts, began to gather across an atmosphere newly born. The air thickened, folding and unfolding with invisible winds. Lightning flickered through the dense mists, its light reflecting in oceans that were no more than vast pools of warmth and shadow. Every spark of that celestial fire spoke a single word to the waiting earth soon. Beneath those waters, molecules danced. They joined, separated, and joined again in a rhythm that echoed eternity. They were simple, too simple to know themselves, yet within their bonds lay a seed, a quiet yearning to become. From the smallest trembling of chemistry, the story of all life began to write itself line by line in the ink of the deep. Eons passed in that slow whispering of creation. Continents rose, then sank again beneath the rolling tides. Volcanoes bled into the sea, shaping islands that would later cradle forests and bones. The sun, once veiled in smoke, began to shine through in golden waves, warming the edges of a newborn sky. And through that endless passage, through stone and flame and shadow, the pulse continued. It moved from ocean to land, from mineral to breath, weaving a pattern no eye had yet seen. It was the voice of becoming soft, patient, eternal. There in the cradle of Ethiopia's ancient soils, the earth prepared her finest secret. Hidden among the roots of trees that had not yet taken names, beneath skies that had never known flight, a destiny was being sculpted. Atoms drawn together by laws older than light began the long, delicate dance that would one day create thought tenderness and the trembling wonder of awareness. Still silence ruled. It was not an empty silence, but one full of waiting, like the pause between two great breaths of the universe. Every sound that would ever exist, every voice, every cry, every song rested quietly within that hush. Far beneath the crust, magma flowed like liquid heartbeat, feeding the slow dream of continents. The world was pregnant with possibility, and though no creature yet walked its plains, no river sang, no leaf trembled in the wind, something unseen listened. It was as if the earth herself anticipated what she would one day give birth to, a being that would look upon her face and remember her silence. A being that would wonder why it was chosen to rise, to think, to dream. That creature not yet formed slept in the dust of future bones, waiting for the call of dawn. The stillness lingered for 1,000,000,000 years more, and then, as time's current gathered weight, the world began to breathe. Mist turned to rain, rain turned to rivers, rivers carved valleys and deltas, drawing paths across the newborn continents. Forests of ferns unfurled in the damp air, their fronds whispering to the wind for the first time. Creatures strange and soft began to move beneath the shallow waters, uncertain, fragile but alive. Life, once only a dream within the stone, had learned the art of movement. It spread across the world like a quiet tide testing the shape of existence. From single cells came hunger. From hunger came instinct. From instinct, awareness. Still, the silence of the beginning lingered beneath it, all the deep hum of Earth's memory, the reminder of what came before sound. Every living thing carried a piece of that silence within it. Even now, in the faint space between heartbeats, it can still be heard, the original calm, the first stillness that gave birth to motion. And so the world waited once more. For within that vast expanse of green and shadow, among the creatures that crept and flew and dreamed beneath the African sun, one lineage was beginning to change. A shape unlike any before, upright, curious, hesitant. It was not yet human, not yet ruler, but it carried within it the memory of fire and the seed of thought. Its name would one day be called Ardipithecus, but for now it slept beneath the canopies of ancient trees in the hush between worlds, waiting for the wind to speak its name. The earth turned slowly beneath it, the sun climbing its endless path, and the silence vast eternal began to open its eyes. And from that first whisper of stillness, the story of becoming began. The earth stirred, not abruptly, not with thunder or flame, but with the quiet insistence of dawn after a long night. The silence that had ruled since the beginning began to fracture not in violence, but in tenderness. It opened like a bud in slow bloom, allowing the soft breath of motion to spill into the waiting air. Light thin as gossamer brushed the edges of an awakening world. It touched the forests, first forests, unlike any we know, where trunks were pillars of vaporous green, and leaves shimmered like the memory of water. Mist drifted through these newborn canopies, and every droplet caught the light of a sun still learning how to shine. Time no longer slept. It began to hum in the quiet rhythms of rain and growth. Where stone once ruled, moss began to creep. Where rivers once wandered aimlessly, they now sang their way toward the sea. And in the deep shadows beneath ferns taller than men would ever grow, life began its first experiments in wonder. Tiny creatures, soft-bodied and uncertain, moved through the warm shallows, feeling the pulse of their own existence for the first time. They had no names, no purpose beyond motion, but in their simple being, they fulfilled the dream that had slumbered since the dawn of silence to live. Each flicker of a fin, each slow ripple of a body across mud, wrote another syllable into the poem of creation. The air thickened with breath. Not yet oxygen as we would know it, but something raw and vital, the scent of beginnings. The sky shimmered with storms, the earth trembled with fertility, and the oceans rose and fell in long, drowsy sighs. It was the first true heartbeat of the planet, deep, slow, and eternal. And somewhere in the cradle of ancient Africa, beneath layers of volcanic dust and green canopy, the land itself seemed to remember what was coming, its soil rich with minerals, and the ghosts of ancient seas waited like a womb. Within that fertile darkness, the ancestors of all that would one day walk, run, and dream began their endless rehearsal, shaping limbs, testing lungs, learning the gravity of being alive. The first trees reached upward, their roots sinking deep into the flesh of the earth. Rain fell, and for the first time the planet knew the sound of rhythm. It echoed through leaves, through stone, through the still air, the gentle percussion of becoming. From this rhythm, patterns emerged, the slow spiral of shells, the perfect geometry of seeds, the symmetry of wings that would soon learn to flutter. Life was no longer a whisper. It was a murmur, faint but insistent, that spread across the continents like a language older than words. And in that spreading murmur, something began to awaken, not just in matter, but in meaning. Each movement, each adaptation, each fragile birth was guided by something unseen, not intention, but possibility. The universe was experimenting with thought. Eons passed like sighs. Species rose and fell in the slow pulse of ages. The world grew forests, lost them, grew them again. Mountains rose like dreams and crumbled like forgotten names. Through it all, life persisted endlessly, rewriting itself endlessly, searching for the next step in its quiet ascent. It was during one of these silent symphonies of change that a creature looked upward for the first time. Its eyes, small and dark, reflected not only the canopy above, but something beyond it, the endless, unreachable blue. It did not yet know why it looked, but the act itself changed everything. For in that moment, curiosity was born. Curiosity, the first flicker of what would one day become awareness. The same force that would drive hands to craft tools, minds to wonder about stars and hearts, to seek meaning in the spaces between moments. It began here, in this soft awakening of a creature that did not yet know it would change the world. The forests of Africa at that time were a mosaic of warmth and shadow. Great fig trees spread their roots like veins across the earth. Rivers glimmered in the sunlight, winding like living threads through valleys alive with color. Birds called their songs strange and primal, half instinct, half joy. And through that lush cathedral of life, the ancestors of Ardipithecus began to move. They were not yet rulers. They were survivors, gentle, alert, cautious. Their bodies were small, their movements fluid, balanced between branch and ground. They carried within them a duality, part creature of the trees, part walker of the earth. It was as though nature herself could not decide which world they belonged to, so she allowed them both. They climbed to gather fruit, their long fingers curling around bark slick with dew. They descended to drink, their faces reflected in the still waters of dawn. And when they looked upon their own reflection, something shimmered, a momentary recognition, a faint awareness that the image looking back was not the world, but themselves. It was the first awakening of self-faint, as moonlight fleeting as a dream, yet from it would one day bloom consciousness. Each generation carried the flame a little further. They learned which fruits healed and which harmed. They listened to the calls of birds, the rustle of predators in the brush. They remembered not with words, but with instincts sharpened by time. And in remembering, they began. The earth watched in silence. She did not rush their becoming. Every step of evolution was a meditation, every mutation a breath in the endless exhalation of creation. Storms swept across the land and were gone. Seasons came and went, though no one yet named them. Through drought and flood, through hunger and plenty, the spark of awareness endured. The creatures adapted not for dominance, but for survival. And yet buried deep within that survival was the seed of destiny. They learned balance between the safety of trees and the freedom of the open ground. Their feet flattened their posture, straightened their gaze, lifted. The line between beast and being blurred. Each step upright was a declaration whispered to the stars, "We are here." The first awakening was not loud. It was not a revolution, but a slow rising tide. It began in the quiet moments, a hand reaching for a fallen fruit, a glance toward the horizon, a pause before moving on. Every heartbeat echoed a question not yet spoken. What am I? And though the answer would take millions of years to form, the question itself was enough. It was the spark that would one day ignite fire, art, and faith. It was the quiet current running beneath every dream that would follow. The forests continued to whisper. Night fell, and the stars appeared ancient, patient witnesses to the unfolding story below. The creatures of the land rested, but the world did not sleep. The pulse of life continued steady and eternal. In the heart of Africa, where volcanic soil met rain-rich plains, the next chapter of existence was already stirring. Within that stirring lay Ardipithecus, small, fragile, and yet immense in what it represented. It carried the memory of silence, the rhythm of the first rain, the yearning of every molecule that had ever reached toward light. Its eyes, dark and gentle, held the reflection of all that had come before and all that was still to be. This was the true awakening, not of flesh, but of awareness, not of power, but of connection. The earth no longer dreamed alone. She had created something that could dream with her. In that partnership between soil and soul, between time and thought, the destiny of life began to shift. The air grew quieter, as if listening. The rivers slowed their surfaces calm, mirroring the first starlight. The night wrapped itself around the forests in soft shadows, and the world exhaled. There, under that ancient sky, the future rulers of the earth slept curled in the safety of branches, hearts beating in rhythm with the planet's pulse. The silence of the beginning was no longer empty. It was full of breath of memory, of possibility. And in the distance, faint as a dream, the wind carried the echo of what would one day be called thought. The earth had awakened, and with her the story of Ardipithecus had begun. The world was no longer a whisper. It had begun to hum, a low, steady sound, like the breathing of something immense and alive. In the heart of Africa, the land stretched wide beneath the sun's tender hand. Rivers braided themselves through green valleys glittering under skies, the color of calm water. Mountains rose in the distance, their ridges blue and hazy with age. And everywhere life moved, not in chaos, but in harmony, as if the entire planet were learning to sing in tune. Here, the earth reached a kind of stillness, within movement, a balance between what had been and what was coming. It was the time when the ancient forests gave way to open savannas, when trees stood farther apart, and the horizon widened into possibility. And within this new openness, life found both danger and freedom. It was a world of becoming bright, uncertain, and endlessly beautiful. Ardipithecus lived at the edge of that transformation. Half in the trees, half on the ground, this small, graceful being carried within her the delicate bridge between past and future. She was neither ape nor human, but something in between, a creature suspended in the act of evolution, her bones written with the story of transition. Her hands were nimble, her feet still curved for climbing, yet her hips and spine whispered of walking upright, of a destiny that would one day stand tall beneath the stars. In the cool mornings when mist clung to the leaves and light dripped gently through the canopy, Ardipithecus would stir. She moved softly, almost silently, the way all beings move when they are part of the world, rather than apart from it. Her dark eyes caught the first shimmer of dawn. The air was full of scent, wet bark, ripe figs, the faint musk of nearby creatures, and every inhale tied her more deeply to the land that had birthed her. She lived not in tribes, as her distant descendants would, but in quiet companionship, small groups that moved together through the forest, guided by instinct, older than language. They communicated through glances, through the tilt of a head, through the soft murmur of comfort. There was no speech yet, there was understanding. There was no thought of time yet, each moment was lived completely. When hunger came, she foraged, plucking fruits, pulling roots, cracking seeds, with stones smoothed by countless hands before hers. When danger came, a rustle in the grass, the shadow of a leopard, she froze, heart thrumming in rhythm with the forest. And when night returned, she climbed to the safety of branches, curling into the cradle of leaves as the stars opened above her like 1,000 silent eyes. This was not yet the world of humanity, but it was its heartbeat, the first rhythm of existence that would one day evolve into story, into memory, into dream. All around her, the planet itself seemed to change in time with her breath. Volcanoes still grumbled far beneath the crust, reshaping the land. Rains carved new rivers, which cut through old ones, weaving new maps across the plains. The climate shifted slowly, imperceptibly, but enough to change the rules of survival. The forests thinned, and the open world beyond began to beckon. For the first time, some among her kind stepped farther from the trees than instinct advised. They crossed short distances between groves, feeling the strange heat of the open savanna on their backs. They walked upright for longer stretches, not yet as habit, but as necessity. Each step across that golden grass was a rehearsal for humanity. In those quiet crossings, the world took notice. The wind brushed against their skin as if in blessing. The sun lingered a little longer upon their faces, and the earth-patient ancient seemed to whisper, "You are learning to become." It was a fragile world. Predators moved silently through the tall grass saber-tooths, hyenas, great eagles that circled high above. But for every danger, there was also abundance. Rivers rich with fish trees, heavy with fruit fields, alive with insects and seeds. The balance was perfect, delicate as a heartbeat. Ardipithecus did not yet imagine the future, yet she carried it in her every movement. Each time she grasped a branch, her hand remembered. Each time she walked upright, her body practiced. The patterns of muscle and bone that would one day build cities and paint stars into ceilings were already being written in her silent, gentle existence. And though she knew nothing of destiny, the universe knew. Evolution is not a mind, yet it thinks in the language of time, patient, precise, unending. From the first single cell to this quiet creature beneath the African sun, every change, every adaptation had been part of a song that only the earth could hear in full. The world of Ardipithecus was not one of progress, but of presence. She did not hurry. No one did. Life moved at the pace of wind and rain, slow, rhythmic, inevitable. There was no past to regret, no future to seek, only the vast eternal now. Imagine standing there with her. The air is thick and warm, full of distant calls, birds, insects, the rustle of unseen movement. You can smell the sweetness of figs, the sharp tang of wet earth after rain. The sun filters through the trees, painting the ground in golden lattices. And as you breathe, you can almost feel the world learning to dream through her. She pauses, head-lifted nostrils flaring at a scent in the wind. Her eyes, dark as volcanic soil, reflect the light of a young sun. For a moment you could believe she is already aware not of what she is, but that she is. And that awareness, faint and formless, ripples outward, like a drop falling into the ocean of time. It would be millions of years before thought learned language, before fire met hand, before stories were born from memory. But in her stillness, the seed of all that was to come rested quietly. The earth, too, seemed aware of her significance. Each evening when the last light faded, the horizon glowed for a moment longer, a soft reminder that even the smallest life carries the universe within it. The stars began to wheel overhead, their ancient patterns tracing invisible paths across the sky. Perhaps one of those stars shining through the humid air fell upon the eyes of Ardipithecus, reflecting in them the future shape of humankind. And perhaps in that reflection, the earth saw herself no longer silent, no longer alone, but mirrored in the gaze of something that would one day remember her. In that sense, the world was born twice, once in matter, once in mind. The first birth had been of stone and fire, the second of awareness and wonder. Ardipithecus stood at the threshold of that second birth, the quiet dawn of consciousness. It was not intellect that defined her, but connection. She belonged wholly to the earth, to its cycles, its rhythms, its quiet breathing. There was no boundary between her and the world. She was part of its pulse. The wind moved her hair, the soil pressed cool against her hands, the sun warmed her bones. Everything she was came from everything around her, and yet something new shimmered within her, the faint outline of what would one day be called mind. It was the same awareness that still lingers in us now, though buried beneath words and cities and noise, the deep remembering of what it means to be alive upon the earth. This was the true birth of the world, not merely the rise of life, but the dawning of reflection. For a planet can only truly be said to live when something upon it looks back and sees it. As centuries melted into millennia, the forests continued to thin. The rivers shifted course, the climate grew cooler, drier. But with every change, life adapted, and within that adaptation lay the quiet wisdom of survival. Ardipithecus moved with her kin across the edges of forest and grassland, following fruit, following shade, following the whisper of rivers. Every footstep pressed into the soil, a small act of faith that the world would continue to hold them, to provide, to teach. Each footprint was a prayer in motion, left not to be seen, but to be remembered by time itself. And the earth remembered. She kept their bones in her warm embrace, fossilizing their stories so that millions of years later, their shape could rise again in our minds, not as ghosts, but as ancestors. When modern eyes would one day uncover the bones of Ardipithecus, her delicate pelvis, her hand bones curved yet strong, it would be as if time itself had exhaled, whispering, "Here is where you began." Here in this quiet cradle of Africa, the world was reborn in thought. The creatures that came before her had moved through the world. She began to move with it. That was the difference, subtle but profound. It was not domination, but belonging. Not power, but participation in the rhythm of creation. And so the world of Ardipithecus shone not with the brightness of civilization, but with the calm radiance of connection. It was a world still innocent of separation, where everything breathed together, the wind in the trees, the pulse in her veins, the light in the clouds, all of it part of one continuous heartbeat. Night fell again, as it always did. The stars burned quietly above the forest canopy. And as Ardipithecus drifted into sleep, curled among the branches, the earth kept her close. In her dreams, there was no fear, no memory, no future, only the slow rhythm of being. It was enough. It had always been enough. The rivers murmured softly in the distance. The wind caressed the leaves, and the dawn that would one day awaken humanity waited patiently just beyond the horizon. The world had been born not just as a place, but as a story, and Ardipithecus was its first whisper. The morning of the world unfolded slowly, as it always had, not in a rush of light, but in a slow unfurling of warmth across the skin of the earth. The rivers shimmered with gold, the trees swayed in a rhythm older than language, and the air was full of quiet intention. Everything was becoming, everything was alive. The forests of Africa breathed in long, patient sighs. They stretched from the highlands to the valleys, from volcanic ridges to wide open plains where the horizon seemed infinite. The earth was a vast symphony of green, of sound, of motion, of gentle transformation. And in the midst of that quiet music, the lineage of Ardipithecus was learning to move to the rhythm of life itself. The growth of life was not merely a matter of birth and survival. It was the deep, invisible weaving of connections, root to rain, feather to wind, eye to light. Each element of the world leaned upon another, completing a circle that never truly ended. The rivers fed the trees fed the air fed the lungs of all who breathed. And within that circle, thought was growing, not yet reason, not yet story, but something that would one day lead to both. Ardipithecus lived as part of that circle. Her every movement echoed the laws of balance. When she foraged, she did not strip a tree bare, she took what she needed, and the forest responded in kind. When she walked, she followed the paths that water had already carved. She lived in rhythm, not in resistance. Her world was filled with sound. The distant roar of thunder rolling over the mountains, the buzz of insects rising from the grass, the crackle of branches underfoot, and the endless whisper of the wind through the canopy. There were no words yet, everything spoke. Each morning began in the same gentle ceremony. The mist lifted, revealing a landscape both ancient and ever new. Ardipithecus would climb down from the branches that had sheltered her through the night. Her fingers, strong and curved, grasped the rough bark. Her feet found their places without thought. The air was cool and damp, rich with the scent of wet leaves. She would pause for a moment on the lowest branch, watching the sun climb through the veil of trees, feeling the warmth spread across her fur and skin. And then softly, she would drop to the ground, the same gesture that her descendants would repeat for millions of years, stepping from safety into the unknown. On the forest floor, the earth was alive with movement. Beetles crawled through the moss. Tiny frogs clung to the undersides of leaves. The soil itself shimmered with the breath of a million unseen lives. Every footfall stirred a small cloud of scent and sound. Every movement echoed through a world still learning its own name. She moved through it with grace, slow, deliberate, as if she understood that to move too quickly was to disturb the balance that allowed her to exist. Her kind had learned caution from the forest itself. The shadows could hold both fruit and fangs, both nourishment and death. And so they lived by quiet wisdom, the kind born not from thought, but from listening. When the heat of the day came, she would rest. High among the branches, she would sit and watch the world unfold below. Her gaze followed the patterns of light through leaves, the movement of clouds across the sky. Sometimes she reached out to touch a passing butterfly or tilted her head to listen to the call of distant birds. There was a softness in her, a quiet curiosity that belonged to something greater than instinct. Below her, other creatures moved: monkeys, antelope, wild pigs, and the first ancestors of elephants. They drank from the same rivers, fed from the same trees. There was no ownership, no dominion, only coexistence. Every creature belonged to the same vast breath, the same pulse of life that flowed through the land. The forests began to thin. Season by season, the rains came later, and the spaces between the trees widened. New plants grew, tall grasses that shimmered like gold beneath the sun. The open plains called softly to the creatures of the trees. Some ignored it, some feared it, and some, like Ardipithecus, began to explore. Stepping from the shadows of the forest into the bright expanse of grassland was an act of courage as old as time. The open world held both danger and promise. There were no branches to climb, no leaves to hide behind, but there was also space to see, to move, to wander. It was in that space that evolution found its canvas. At first, she walked only a few steps before returning to the safety of the trees. Her feet were not yet made for distance, her body still shaped by a life spent climbing. But with each journey, each hesitant step into the light, she grew stronger. Her spine straightened. Her balance shifted. And slowly, the posture of the forest became the posture of the plains. She was not alone. Her companions followed, drawn by fruiting bushes, by new sources of food, by the shimmer of water far in the distance. Together, they crossed patches of sunlit grass, their shadows long against the earth. It was not yet migration, only exploration. But every movement outward was a step toward the future. The growth of life was not measured in years, but in courage. Every species that stepped beyond its familiar world contributed to the slow, magnificent expansion of possibility. Each adaptation was an answer to the quiet question that the universe had been asking since the dawn of time: can life go further? And so it did. The forests gave birth to the plains to wanderers, the wanderers to thinkers. From root to footstep, the chain of being stretched onward, never breaking, never pausing, never ending. The rains came again. The rivers swelled, turning the valleys into mirrors. Lightning flashed across the sky, and thunder rolled through the trees. Ardipithecus huddled beneath broad leaves, her body shivering, yet her eyes bright with something more than fear, fascination. Even in the face of storm and darkness, she looked outward, not inward. That gaze, that instinct to see, was the beginning of all knowing. When the storm passed, the world smelled of life renewed. Steam rose from the soil. The air was sweet with the scent of growth. The rivers ran thick and red with clay, carrying the memory of mountains down to the sea. Every drop of that water was history in motion, time itself flowing forward. The nights were deep and endless, stars scattered across the sky like dust upon black glass. Sometimes, when the air was still and the forest quiet, she would look upward. There was no understanding in her gaze, yet something stirred an ancient recognition, as if she could sense that the light above was kin to the fire that burned within her cells. That same light would one day fill the minds of poets and dreamers, but for now it flickered quietly in the heart of a small creature in Africa. The growth of life was not just physical, it was spiritual, though the word had not yet been born. It was the slow realization of connection, that everything living shared the same spark, the same silent origin. From the hum of insects to the pulse of her own blood, everything was woven into one great continuum. As the millennia unfolded, that understanding deepened in ways too subtle to see. Ardipithecus lived and died as all creatures did. Her children followed her grandchildren after them. The forests continued to recede, the plains continued to widen, and with each passing generation, the line between tree-dweller and groundwalker blurred further. The earth watched, as she always did, patient, impartial, loving. She had seen countless forms rise and fall, yet in this one there was something new in tension. The eyes of Ardipithecus were not only watchful, they were wondering. They did not simply react to the world, they studied it, and in that study lay the earliest echo of what would one day be knowledge. The creatures of her time would never know what they had begun. They would never imagine cities' language memory. But they had set the wheel in motion, and the wheel, once turning, would never stop. At the heart of that motion was a truth as old as the stars. Life does not grow in straight lines. It spirals outward, inward, forward, back, always seeking balance. And in that spiral, the story of Ardipithecus was written not in dominance, but in harmony. She was small, fragile, easily forgotten in the grand theater of evolution. Yet without her and those like her, the chain would have broken. She carried within her not just the potential of humanity, but the memory of every creature before her. In her eyes, the fish that first crawled onto land still swam. In her hands, the bones of reptiles still reached toward the sun. She was the sum of everything that had ever dared to live. And so, as night once more spread across the land, she found her place among the branches and closed her eyes. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying the scent of rain and distant thunder. The stars blinked above, ancient and patient, and somewhere deep within, the soil roots and bones intertwined old life, feeding new life, remembering old. The growth of life was not an explosion, but a breath. It was not progress, but continuity. And beneath the vast dreaming sky, the first echoes of humankind continued to unfold quietly, humbly, beautifully. The earth breathed, and through Ardipithecus she began to dream herself awake. The air of the world had changed. It was lighter now, clear and open, tinged with the warmth of a gentler sun. The forests still lingered their green canopies, whispering with the voices of ancient life. But beyond their edges, the grasslands had begun their slow conquest. The horizon stretched wide, shimmering in gold and dust, and the wind carried the scent of both promise and farewell. This was the age when the earth paused between two breaths, the breath of what had been and the breath of what would be. It was the age of becoming. In the heart of this shifting world, Ardipithecus stood at the threshold of transformation. She was no longer only a creature of the trees, but not yet a creature of the plains. Her world was a balance between shadow and light, between safety and curiosity, between the memory of instinct and the first stirrings of choice. Each sunrise brought a new possibility, and each sunset carried the quiet ache of change. The mornings began softly. Mist gathered in hollows, dew hung heavy upon blades of grass, and the cries of distant birds rolled like waves through the air. Ardipithecus would wake within the cradle of branches, stretching her limbs to greet the day. The warmth of the sun traced her back as she descended her fingers and toes, finding their way down the bark with the certainty of generations. Below her, the world waited glowing alive endless. There was a rhythm to her days, an unspoken ritual carved by time itself. She foraged among figs and berries, drinking from clear streams that wound through the roots of old trees. She watched the patterns of light through the canopy, followed the rustling trails of insects, and learned in her own way the language of the land. Nothing in her world was wasted. Every sound, every scent, every motion had meaning. Even the wind carried stories of rain yet to come, of predators on the move, of fruit ripening in the farthest reaches of the forest. And as she listened, she learned, not through thought, but through attention, the deep, wordless knowing that flows between all living things. It was here in these silent exchanges between creature and world that the first threads of understanding began to weave themselves into the tapestry of life. The world around her, too, was learning. The earth was experimenting, shaping, refining. Bones changed, hands grew stronger, fingers more precise. Feet learned to hold balance upon the open ground. Every adaptation was an answer not to desire, but to necessity. In this vast, patient laboratory of nature, nothing was wasted and nothing was rushed. When the heat of midday came, Ardipithecus would rest in the shade. The air shimmered with warmth, and the hum of insects filled the stillness. Sometimes she would watch dust rise from the plains, distant herds moving unseen, yet felt through the trembling of the ground. Sometimes she would watch the clouds gather far away, their edges burning white against the blue, their bellies swollen with rain. And sometimes she would simply close her eyes and listen to the slow, steady heartbeat of the world. It was in those moments of quiet that something deeper began to take root, a kind of awareness that reached beyond instinct. She began to notice not just what was, but what might be. A branch that could be used not only to climb, but to reach. A stone that could break open fruit, not just lie beneath her feet. A fallen leaf that held the imprint of another's touch. These were the beginnings of imagination, the most delicate and dangerous gift the earth would ever give. Imagination is the mother of becoming. It begins not in words, but in wonder, in curiosity, in the quiet, trembling recognition that the world can be more than it appears. And in Ardipithecus, that wonder had begun to bloom. She moved differently now, more deliberate, more upright. When she walked across the forest floor, her steps carried a strange grace, a confidence that came from discovery. The other creatures still moved as they always had, reacting, surviving, but she moved with intention, with awareness. She was not yet human, but she had begun to sense the distance between what she was and what she could become. At dusk, when the light softened to amber and the sky deepened toward indigo, the forest sang its evening song. The calls of unseen animals echoed through the trees, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the sighing of wind. Ardipithecus would climb again, her fingers curling around familiar branches. From her perch, she would watch the last rays of light slip across the horizon. Below, shadows stretched long and soft, and above the first stars began to appear silent and patient as ever. She could not name them, but she looked. And in that looking, the seeds of contemplation were sown. She was beginning in her own way to wonder. It was this wonder that marked the true birth of humanity, not tools, not language, not fire. Wonder was the first flame, invisible but eternal. The moment life began to gaze upon itself and ask, "What am I?" the moment the world began to look back through the eyes of its own creation. The age of becoming was not marked by great events, but by small, quiet gestures, the kind that echo forever. A hand reaching toward light, a foot lifting from the ground, a gaze turned to the sky. Each motion was a thread in the invisible bridge between instinct and awareness. Beyond her forests, other creatures evolved. The land itself was alive with change. New species appeared, each testing new forms, new ways to live. The earth was experimenting through diversity, life unfolding in 1,000 directions at once. Some lines would end in silence, others would rise toward thought. Ardipithecus's kind was one such branch, fragile, yet enduring, poised at the edge of transformation. When the rains came, they came suddenly, sheets of water cascading through the leaves, drumming on the soil, filling the air with the scent of renewal. She would cling to the branches, drenched but unafraid, eyes wide as the storm raged. Lightning lit the sky, illuminating the forest in flashes of white fire. The thunder followed, rolling across the land like the voice of time itself. And when it passed, the world was clean again, washed, reborn. She descended, dripping her fur heavy with water. The streams had swelled into rivers, and the rivers into lakes. The air was filled with the songs of frogs and the distant calls of creatures newly stirred to life. The earth herself seemed to glow from within, pulsing with the rhythm of creation. Ardipithecus paused at the water's edge. She leaned forward and saw her reflection rippled, imperfect, but there. For a heartbeat, she watched herself, watching. Her hand reached out, touching the surface, breaking the image into pieces. And as the ripples spread outward, she blinked, not in confusion, but in recognition. She had seen herself. And though she did not know it, that small act was the dawn of identity. The age of becoming was full of such invisible awakenings. Awareness grew like roots in the dark, unseen, but unstoppable. Every act of noticing changed the world a little more. The forest, once indifferent, became a companion. The sky, once distant, became a mirror. And the earth, once silent, began to speak through the eyes of its child. As the generations passed, the line of Ardipithecus slowly gave way to others taller, stronger, more adapted to the open land. But her legacy endured. She was the first whisper in the long song of humankind, the prelude to all that would follow. Through her, the world learned to dream in flesh and bone. She did not know that her time was ending. No creature ever does. But the rhythm of the earth had already begun to shift again. The climate cooled. The forests thinned further. The plains stretched even wider. Each change a note in the eternal melody of adaptation. As her kind moved on, they left no monuments, no traces but footprints and bones. Yet in those bones lay the architecture of tomorrow, hips, made for walking hands, made for shaping a mind, made for wondering. Every curve of bone was a sentence in the story of life, written not with ink, but with endurance. The age of becoming was not the age of triumph. It was an age of learning, of patience, of quiet evolution. It was the time when nature crafted the possibility of thought, and life learned slowly to listen to its own heartbeat. At night, the wind moved softly through the grasslands, carrying with it the songs of creatures yet unborn. The stars hung low, bright and vast, watching in silence. And somewhere beneath them, the descendants of Ardipithecus slept, their small bodies curled against one another, their dreams filled not with fear, but with the pulse of a living earth. The world was no longer merely alive. It was aware of its aliveness. And in that awareness, everything changed. The age of becoming had come, and through it, the earth had found its voice. Not in thunder, not in fire, but in the quiet breath of a creature who would one day call herself human. And still beneath the stars, the universe whispered softly to itself, "Continue." The world was changing again. The earth, never still for long, began to draw in a deeper breath. The warmth that had long embraced the forests was fading, replaced by cooler winds that whispered of transformation. Rain no longer fell in endless abundance, and the old trees, once heavy with fruit, began to stand farther apart. The age of abundance was softening into an age of challenge, and in that challenge, life prepared itself for the next great leap. For countless generations, Ardipithecus and her kin had lived within the rhythm of plenty. The forest canopy had been both roof and sanctuary, a living cathedral of safety and nourishment. But now the boundaries of that green world began to thin, revealing a horizon that seemed to stretch forever. Beyond the trees, grasslands shimmered under the sun, wide open and filled with both danger and opportunity. It was there in that shimmering threshold between shadow and light that destiny waited. Ardipithecus stood at the edge of the forest one morning, her breath rising in pale mist. The dawn was colder than before, the air dry and sharp. She looked out across the golden plains, the wind pressing gently against her back. The trees behind her whispered of the past. The horizon ahead whispered of possibility. She hesitated, as all creatures do when evolution calls them forward. And then she stepped. The earth beneath her feet was hard cracked in places, but steady. Each step was new, uncertain, yet necessary. The body of the forest dweller was being tested in a world that required adaptation. Her feet, once curved for climbing, began to find balance on the open ground. Her back straightened in response to the weight of the endless sky. Her eyes, used to the green nearness of leaves, now stretched their gaze across distances, watching for movement, for water, for survival. In this new world, sight became the language of life. To see was to live, and to live was to learn. The turning point was not a single moment, but a long unfolding, a conversation between the earth and its children. Every drought, every flood, every fallen tree was part of that dialogue. The planet was sculpting the minds and bodies of those who remained. Some creatures faded, unable to bend with the changing rhythm. Others, like Ardipithecus, adapted not through strength, but through awareness, through the quiet genius of observation. The plains were alive with motion. Herds of grazing animals moved in shimmering waves across the horizon. Predators followed sleek, patient, merciless. Insects hummed above the tall grasses, and birds circled in the high air searching for the smallest signs of life. This was a new kind of world, open, exposed, filled with both beauty and peril. Here, vigilance was survival, and awareness became wisdom. Ardipithecus learned the ways of the open land. She listened to the wind reading its messages, the scent of rain, the musk of predators, the dust of distant movement. She watched the sky for the circling shadows of raptors. She found shade beneath scattered acacias, their roots deep in the parched soil. Each day demanded choice, and in those choices, consciousness sharpened. The old patterns began to change. No longer could she rely only on the forest's abundance. She had to remember where fruit trees grew, where water could be found after the rains, where danger waited. Memory, that fragile thread of time within the mind, became as vital as strength. It was the first map ever drawn, not on stone, but in thought. The turning point was as much within as without. The world was shaping her, but she was beginning to shape the world in return. She broke twigs to reach fruit. She threw pebbles to scatter predators. She carried branches across distances, her fingers closing around them, not just as tools, but as extensions of will. For the first time, the boundary between instinct and intention blurred. In those gestures, small, unnoticed by time, lay the first whispers of mastery. The same movements that would one day carve tools, kindle fire, build shelter. It was not yet civilization, but it was its shadow cast far into the past. As the forests continued to recede, her kind followed the rivers that still glimmered through the plains. The sound of running water became a promise of life. By day they traveled, by night they rested huddled together beneath the cold stars. The nights were longer now, the air thinner, and the darkness filled with sounds both haunting and sacred, the cry of distant animals, the rustle of grass, the low hum of the wind across the stones. And yet, amid that strangeness, there was peace. For the earth had not abandoned her children. She was merely teaching them to listen more closely, to move with her rather than against her. Through hardship, the world deepened their resilience. Through loss, it strengthened their memory. Through isolation, it gave birth to communion. There were moments fleeting fragile when she would look to the horizon and pause. The light of dawn stretched before her like a golden sea. Her eyes, large and steady, reflected that light as though holding it. And within that gaze, the earth could see herself no longer alone, but seen. It was the most profound turning of all. The world had looked upon itself through the eyes of its creation, and in that reflection, awareness took root. The turning point was not a tragedy, though it was full of endings. It was the soft unfolding of necessity, the quiet acceptance that every world must change to remain alive. The lush forests that had sheltered her ancestors would never return as they were. But the open plains held a new kind of promise, the promise of movement, of vision, of evolution. In that openness, thought could grow. In that exposure, imagination could breathe. As time continued its slow, relentless march, the descendants of Ardipithecus learned to stand taller, to travel farther. The first faint traces of a future lineage shimmered in their bones, a future that would walk, hunt, gather, remember, and dream. The earth was sculpting not just bodies, but minds. And in those minds, something extraordinary was stirring the faint echo of meaning. She would never know it, but Ardipithecus was standing at the door of humanity. The winds of change brushed against her skin, and in them carried the first murmur of identity, not as a name, but as a knowing. The knowing that she was alive and that her life was part of something vast, unending, and beautiful. At night, she slept in the crook of branches, but her dreams were no longer only of hunger and survival. Sometimes she dreamed of movement, of walking into light, of horizons that never ended. Sometimes she dreamed of faces others like her, yet not the same. Dreams were the language of the mind awakening. They were the bridge between what was and what might be, and as she dreamed, the world dreamed with her. The stars burned cold above each one, a silent witness to the unfolding story of consciousness. The rivers murmured beneath the moonlight, whispering of time yet to come, and the earth, her first home, her eternal mother, waited with infinite patience. Every life is a bridge between what came before and what comes after. Ardipithecus was that bridge. Her hands, still rough from climbing, had touched the dawn of understanding. Her gaze had carried the spark of recognition that would one day blaze into wonder. Her footsteps had traced the first path that would one day lead to civilization. The turning point was not the end of her kind. It was their gift to the future. Through her endurance, through her quiet adaptation, she ensured that the song of life would continue its melody carried forward in new forms, new voices, new dreams. The earth in her wisdom knew this was how it must be. She does not cling to what she creates. She lets it evolve, lets it move beyond her. For even the planet must allow its children to walk away to find their own horizons. The sun sank low over the savanna, turning the grasses to fire. Shadows stretched long and blue, merging with the coming night. Ardipithecus stood once more at the edge of the forest where her world had always divided trees behind her open land before her. The wind moved through her fur, carrying the cool scent of dusk. She turned her head toward the plains, and for one long, silent moment, she simply stood, poised between the memory of safety and the promise of becoming. Then she walked forward. Her silhouette moved against the fading light, small yet infinite, a living thread between past and future. Each step echoed softly in the heart of time. Behind her the forest sighed, before her the world opened, and the earth whispered once more in a voice that only evolution could hear go on. The turning point had come and gone, and with it the old world exhaled, making room for the birth of something new. The earth has always spoken in cycles. Every rise invites a fall, and every fall in time becomes a rising again. Change is the oldest language the world knows, and in the quiet centuries after the turning point, that language began to flow through every living thing. The plains stretched wide beneath an ever-changing sky. The great forests that once cloaked Africa's heart had faded into fragments, islands of green adrift in seas of golden grass. The rivers, swollen in spring, now shrank beneath the heat of long summers. The wind moved endlessly, carrying dust pollen memory. And within that wind walked the descendants of Ardipithecus, the quiet heirs of her long journey through time. They were not the same as she had been, yet she lived within them in the curve of their spines, in the grace of their hands, in the steady rhythm of their breath. The balance of the world had shifted, and life was learning once more how to live within it. For this was the descent not into darkness, but into transformation. Every age of becoming must yield to an age of renewal. The creatures that once clung to branches now walked upon the earth with growing confidence. They were leaner, swifter, their senses tuned to a broader world. The trees that had once sheltered them became distant landmarks rather than homes. And though the nights were colder, the days more demanding, something remarkable was happening. The earth was teaching endurance. Endurance, that quiet strength that does not fight time, but flows with it. It is the wisdom to bend, to adapt, to survive through stillness as much as through motion. The line of Ardipithecus carried that wisdom like an invisible flame. Through drought and flood, through hunger and fear, they endured. The world was not kind, but it was sacred. Predators prowled the grasslands, great cats with golden eyes, packs of wild dogs that hunted in silence, eagles that cut the sky with shadows. Every day was uncertain, every night a vigil. And yet within this fragility, life deepened its understanding of itself. When a storm gathered black and trembling on the horizon, the air would grow thick with electricity. The wind turned wild, bending the tall grasses into a living sea. Lightning forked across the sky, carving white veins into the clouds. The first drops of rain fell heavy and fast, exploding against the parched soil. And then the flood came. The rivers rose, carving new paths through the valleys. Trees fell, roots twisting skyward like pleading hands. Animals scattered. But when the storm passed, as storms always do, the land shimmered with renewal. The air was cool again, the rivers full, the scent of life returned. It was as if the earth herself were reminding her children that destruction and renewal are not opposites, but partners in the endless dance of becoming. The descendants of Ardipithecus learned this rhythm in their bones. They followed the rivers when the rains came, traveled farther than their ancestors ever had. They remembered the trees, but they no longer depended upon them. Their hands reached for stones, their eyes measured distance, their minds, though still wordless, began to hold images longer than a moment. Memory was growing. The past, once only a fading scent, began to linger. They began to learn from what had been. Each generation carried a little more of the world within them, a little more of its pattern, its wisdom, its sorrow. And so, amid hardship, the renewal began. In the cool of early mornings, they gathered near water, mothers, fathers, the young clinging close. They foraged, shared, rested. The bonds between them grew strong, no longer only instinctual, but emotional. They cared for one another, not just because survival demanded it, but because connection had begun to bloom. In that connection lay the quiet birth of compassion. When one was injured, another lingered nearby. When fruit was scarce, the strong shared with the weak. These gestures, small and ancient, were the first notes in the song of empathy. The earth, watching, smiled in her silent way. For this was her design, not the domination of life, but its communion. The renewal came also through learning. Hands that once only climbed began to shape the world. A branch could become a lever, a stone, a tool. A sound once only a warning could become an invitation. The first true spark of creativity flickered in the shadows of instinct. Creativity is not born from comfort, but from challenge. It rises when the world grows hard, when survival demands imagination. And so, in the heart of Africa, amid drought and danger, imagination took its first trembling breath. They began to leave traces of intention stones arranged in patterns, branches piled in simple shelters, the faint outline of footprints near the riverbanks. Each mark, though unplanned, carried meaning. Each action was a dialogue between creature and creation. Through these quiet exchanges, the earth was renewing herself through her children. For every adaptation of body, there was an evolution of spirit. The mind, once only reactive, was learning to reflect. And reflection is the first form of wisdom. At night, when the world cooled and the stars brightened, the group would huddle together beneath the trees. The air smelled of grass and rain, of the day's warmth fading into memory. The darkness was deep, but not empty. It was full of sound, the chirr of insects, the distant roar of predators, the murmur of wind through the tall grass. They did not fear the night. They lived within it, as much a part of it as the moon above. Sometimes one of them would look upward. The stars shimmered, patient and eternal. Their light fell upon faces that could not yet name them, but could feel their pull. Something within stirred not fear, not wonder, but recognition. They were seeing what would one day be called eternity. The descent had taught humility. The renewal taught awareness. Together they shaped the soul of what would one day be called human. When dawn returned, the first rays of sunlight touched the land in soft gold. Steam rose from the earth. Birds began their songs and the rivers whispered anew. Life continued tireless, fragile, infinite. And within it, consciousness deepened like a seed growing toward light. The old world of Ardipithecus was fading. In her place came new forms, stronger, taller, more suited to the open land. But evolution never truly replaces. It remembers. Every new species carries within it the echo of all that came before. In every step forward, the memory of Ardipithecus still walked. She was not forgotten, for forgetting does not exist in nature. Every breath, every cell, every thought that would ever arise still carried her whisper. She had been the bridge, the fragile thread between silence and song. And through her descendants, that song continued deepening with every generation. The earth, too, began to settle into a new rhythm. The air cooled, the rains found balance once more. Forests and plains reached a quiet truce, sharing the land between them. The great cycles had completed another turn. The descent had brought wisdom. The renewal brought peace. In that peace, something like reverence was born. It was not religion, for there were no words, no symbols, only the quiet awareness that life was sacred, that the world itself was alive and awake, and that every creature, no matter how small, was part of its heartbeat. And perhaps in the stillness of those long nights, as her distant kin slept beneath the stars, the earth whispered one final lesson into their dreams. That survival is not merely to exist, but to remember. To carry forward not only the blood of the past, but its wisdom, its wonder, its gratitude. When the first light of dawn spilled across the horizon, they rose once more. The plains shimmered, the sky opened wide. Their journey continued not out of need, but out of nature's endless desire to become. For this is how renewal always comes, not in the thunder of miracles, but in the quiet persistence of life refusing to fade. The wind swept through the grasslands, bending every blade in unison. The sound was soft like a sigh, the voice of the world breathing again. And as it passed through the valleys, through the rivers, through the hearts of those who walked upon it, the cycle began anew. The earth had descended into change, and through that descent, she had been reborn. The earth remembers. Even as new life unfolds, she keeps within her soil the memory of every being that has ever touched her surface. Bones become dust, dust becomes soil, soil becomes seed, and through that endless exchange, Memory takes form again. Every forest, every river, every breath of wind carries the whispers of what came before. It was through that quiet memory that Ardipithecus endured. Though her bones had long since turned to stone, and her name would not be spoken for millions of years, her essence, that gentle reaching toward awareness, had not vanished. It lived on in the pulse of her descendants, in the widening gaze of each new generation, in the faint but growing fire of thought. And as the world turned through its endless seasons, that fire began to glow brighter. The plains had grown vast, now rolling seas of grass that rippled beneath an infinite sky. Forests lingered only in the distance, like echoes of a dream. The creatures who walked these lands were no longer bound by the branches. They stood upright, their eyes level with the horizon. The wind that once sang through trees now moved across their skin. The earth, in her quiet patience, had given birth to a lineage that could look upon her face and see. They were not yet human as we know the word, but they carried humanity's reflection within them. Their hands once curved for climbing, now reached for purpose. Their eyes once fixed upon fruit and shadow now lingered on the shapes of clouds. Their minds, still simple, began to wander. They noticed patterns, the migration of herds, the ripening of fruit, the way shadows grew long before dusk. And from noticing came understanding. From understanding came choice. Choice, the most fragile and powerful gift the universe has ever given. With it came freedom, and with freedom came responsibility. The creatures of the earth had always been. Now they began to become aware that they were. It was the birth of consciousness, quiet and uncertain, like dawn spilling across the horizon. In the still heat of midday, they gathered by rivers. The water, cool and clear, mirrored their faces. They bent to drink, and for a moment their eyes met their own reflections. They did not yet know the word self, but they knew the sensation, the strange recognition that the being in the water was not another, but the same. The earth had given them not only sight, but reflection. And in reflection, they found connection. They began to understand each other, not just through movement and sound, but through empathy. A glance carried meaning. A gesture could calm or warn or console. The invisible bond that had begun as instinct now deepened into emotion. They felt not only for themselves, but for one another. When one fell, others waited. When one cried, others stayed close. The first spark of compassion flickered in the vast wilderness. It was through compassion that humanity's mirror began to form. For to see oneself in another is to awaken to the truth that all life is one life reflected through countless forms. The earth, as she turned beneath the sun, seemed to sense this awakening. The wind softened. The rivers brightened with new light. The world had created something that could feel the beauty of its own existence. But reflection, like all things, carries duality. To see oneself is also to see separation, the first faint line between I and everything else. It was a fragile divide, yet profound. With it came the awareness of death, of loss of time. The creatures who had once lived wholly in the present now began to remember the past and imagine the future. This was both their gift and their burden. At night they gazed at the stars, the same stars that had watched over Ardipithecus, the same cold fires burning across eternity. The sky was vast and full, and yet they could not look away. In those distant lights they saw something both terrifying and tender, their smallness, their impermanence, their longing to understand. The mirror of humanity was not polished in a day. It took ages of stillness, struggle, and subtle awakening. Every discovery was a reflection of the inner world. When they learned to use a stone to break open fruit, they also broke open thought. When they followed the herds across distances, they also followed the pull of curiosity. And when they held the hands of their young, they also held the first fragile thread of love. Love, not the word, not the idea, but the impulse. The quiet need to protect, to nurture, to belong. It was the mirror's truest light. and from that light, the earth herself seemed to glow more brightly. For what is humanity, if not the universe learning to care for itself? They began to move in small groups, families bound not only by blood, but by choice. They remembered paths, shared food, tended to wounds. The rhythms of their lives became the first patterns of community. Around them the world responded. The grasses bent beneath their passing. Birds circled above, following the trails of their movement. Even the trees seemed to lean toward them as if to listen. Sometimes, when the sun sank low and the air cooled, they would gather in silence. The light-faded shadows deepened, and the earth's great voice, the hum of insects, the sigh of wind, the low call of distant animals surrounded them. They sat close breathing together, feeling the warmth of one another against the growing chill. And though they did not yet have language, the moment itself was a kind of prayer. A communion not of words, but of presence. The mirror of humanity is not only found in thought, it is found in stillness, in connection, in the quiet reflection of one life upon another. To see another being and recognize oneself within it, that is the essence of all compassion. And it was in these simple acts that the sacred began to take root. The world, meanwhile, continued its slow transformation. Volcanoes smoldered on the horizon, breathing clouds of ash into the air. The plains shifted, rivers found new courses. Life moved, adapted, evolved. Each new dawn brought with it 1,000 small experiments, changes in bone, in instinct, in the way eyes saw the world. Evolution was not only sculpting bodies, it was refining perception. Those who could see the world most clearly survived, and those who could feel it most deeply began to dream. The dreams of the early ones were not like ours. They were vast and formless echoes of memory, rhythm, and light. Yet within them was the same longing that would one day fill human hearts, the yearning to belong, to understand, to return to the source of all things. Dreaming was the soul's way of remembering where it came from. And so even as their hands learned to shape the earth, their minds learned to wander through the unseen. They began to carry both worlds within them, the physical and the imagined, the immediate and the eternal. This was the moment the mirror shone brightest, when the inner world reflected the outer and the two became one. It was not perfection that made them human, but awareness. Awareness of light, of loss of one another. Awareness of the strange and beautiful truth that to live is to change, and to change is to remember. They did not yet know how to speak their reflections, but the earth did. She spoke through the rhythm of waves, the whisper of grasses, the deep, slow pulse of the ground beneath their feet. And sometimes when the wind passed over the plains at dusk, it carried their scent, the scent of becoming to the farthest corners of the world. In that moment, the planet itself seemed to exhale. She had seen countless forms rise and fall, but never before had she looked into the eyes of something that could see her in return. For the first time, she was not only alive, she was known. And in that knowing, both she and her children were transformed. The mirror was complete. Life could now behold itself. The earth gazed through their eyes, touched through their hands, dreamed through their minds. And though they would one day forget their origins, building walls, cities, and stories to separate themselves from the soil, the mirror would never break. It lives still in every heartbeat, in every breath, in every quiet moment, when a human being looks at the world and feels it looking back. That is the eternal reflection, the ancient gaze of Ardipithecus, shimmering still in our own. Her eyes, dark and gentle, are our eyes. Her small hands, trembling with curiosity, are our hands. Her silent wonder beneath the stars is our wonder still. And perhaps that is what the earth intended all along. Not that we should rule her, but that we should remember her, and through that remembrance, remember ourselves. For in the mirror of humanity, the universe sees itself awake, and the earth, smiling softly in her endless turning, whispers once more, "You are not apart from me. You are the reflection I made so I could see my own soul. Time moves like a river, never still, never hurried, forever flowing forward, yet always returning to its source. It carries within it the sediments of every life, every breath, every forgotten dream. And though we stand for a moment upon its banks, believing ourselves apart from its current, we are the river too, made of its water, shaped by its course. The earth has known this since her first dawn. From the molten beginning to the cooling crust, from the birth of oceans to the rise of forests and mines, her story has never been linear. It is a circle, vast, patient, eternal. And within that circle, every ending is only a continuation, every silence another form of song. The lineage of Ardipithecus, once small, hidden beneath the canopies of ancient trees, had by now become a memory written into the bones of countless generations. The world that had shaped her was gone, replaced by plains, rivers, and mountains she would never recognize. But her essence endured. It lived in the upright gait of the early walkers, in the curiosity of their gaze, in the warmth of their gatherings. Through them, she still moved, still breathed, still whispered. Evolution had not stopped. It had only changed its rhythm. What began as adaptation was becoming awareness, and what began as survival was becoming meaning. The creatures who once looked to the horizon for fruit or shelter now looked with questions. They felt the pull of the infinite, the same pull that moves tides, that stirs wind, that keeps the planets turning in their slow, sacred dance. The continuum of life is not a line of progress, but a weaving an endless braid of creation and memory. Every new life carries the voices of all who came before, and every death feeds the ground from which the future will grow. Even now, the earth hums with that interwoven song. It vibrates through stone, through root, through blood. To live is to be part of it. To die is only to change the way one sings. In the cool of morning, the descendants of Ardipithecus stirred beneath an awakening sky. They were no longer her children, but her great-grandchildren, wiser, stronger, more attuned to the world around them. They walked the open plains with confidence, gathering fruit, shaping stone, learning fire. And though they could not name it, they carried within them the first understanding of time, that life is fleeting yet endless. They began to watch the seasons. The rhythm of rain and drought became a calendar written in wind and sunlight. They learned that what disappears will one day return. The dry river would flow again, the bare trees would bloom, the cold nights would soften into spring. From that observation came faith not in gods, but in cycles. Faith that the world renews itself, even when all seems lost. The eternal continuum, that endless circle, was revealing itself through their lives. When a child was born, it was as if the earth had breathed again. When one of their own died, they lingered nearby, not in despair, but in reverence. Perhaps they sensed that the body returned to the same soil that fed the trees, that the spirit, if such a thing could be felt, was only another form of wind. In their quiet rituals, the first seeds of understanding were sown. Life is never truly gone. It only changes its shape. The earth, watching through the patience of eons, smiled in her slow, tectonic way. She had given them the gift of reflection, and now she watched as they reflected her most sacred truth, continuity. The rivers flowed endlessly toward the sea. The clouds rose, carrying that water back to the mountains. Rain fell, and the rivers were born again. The same water that nourished the roots of ancient forests now touched the hands of these early beings, and one day it would touch ours. We drink, breathe, and live within the same elements that once moved through their veins. There is no separation, only the illusion of distance within the circle of time. As dusk fell, the horizon burned with the deep amber of eternity. Shadows lengthened, stretching across the plains like threads of night weaving into day's end. The first fires glowed small, flickering points of light against the vastness. They gathered around them, eyes reflecting the dance of flame. It was warmth, it was safety, but it was also something deeper, a symbol of the light within them, the echo of stars brought to earth. For the first time, they had captured a piece of the cosmos and held it in their hands. The same fire that blazed in the sun now lived in their care. And in that fire, they must have felt the pulse of the infinite. It was the beginning of story, of memory, of reverence. The fire whispered, as all ancient things do, "You are part of what has always been. The light you hold is the same light that made you." They could not yet understand those words, but their hearts did. They fed the flames carefully, reverently, as though tending to something sacred. The circle was complete, the energy of the stars feeding the warmth of their small, fragile bodies. And the earth, through their wonder, became aware of her own cosmic origin. The night deepened. Above them, the sky unfolded a tapestry of stars stretching beyond comprehension. They looked upward, the reflection of those stars flickering in their dark, ancient eyes. In that gaze lay the quiet realization that they too were made of the same dust that shimmered above. That the universe was not something apart from them, but something within them. The eternal continuum was not only the cycle of Earth, it was the pulse of existence itself. Every heartbeat, every breath, every birth and death was a ripple in the same infinite sea. Ardipithecus, though long gone, was part of that same sea. So too were all her children, every creature that had walked, flown, or swum beneath the sun, each one a note in the unending harmony of creation. Even now the universe remembers them. Every fossil, every atom, every whisper of wind through grass is a page in the great book of time. When we stand beneath the stars and feel the weight of eternity pressing softly upon our hearts, we are remembering her, the first to stand, to look, to feel. Her story is not past, it is alive in us. And though we live in cities now surrounded by the noise of our own making, the continuum still flows quietly beneath it all. It hums in our blood, it breathes in the trees, it moves in the rhythm of waves and the orbit of moons. The same earth that once cradled Ardipithecus still turns beneath our feet, ancient and patient, her pulse steady as ever. We are her latest dream, not separate from her, but an extension of her longing to know herself. And as we look to the stars, seeking answers to questions older than thought, she looks with us through us. Every act of wonder, every moment of awe, is her reflection shining through our consciousness. For the continuum is not only time, it is awareness. It is the eternal dialogue between the world and the mind it created. The river and the reflection, the flame and the eye that watches it burn. Somewhere deep in the stillness of night, the wind stirs the grasses of ancient Africa. Perhaps even now it moves across the same valleys where Ardipithecus once stood. The trees have changed the rivers too, but the rhythm remains. It is the same wind that brushed her fur, the same air that filled her lungs, now moving through us as breath. The same continuum, the same song. And so the circle holds. The beginning lives within the present. The end is only another form of the beginning. Life rises, falls, transforms, and through it all, the earth keeps dreaming endlessly, beautifully, faithfully. In that dream, Ardipithecus still walks beneath the dawn, her footprints pressed softly into the soil. The light still catches her eyes, and through them the world sees itself anew. The river still runs, carrying her memory into every ocean. And above it all, the stars burn the same ancient fires that watched her birth and will one day witness our own fading. Nothing is lost. Nothing ever ends. We are the continuum, the endless breath of the universe, learning again and again how to see itself. And somewhere beneath the turning sky, the earth whispers, "All that has ever lived lives still." Night settles upon the earth like a memory returning home. The horizon softens, dissolving into shades of blue and silver. The winds grow gentle, moving slowly through the grasslands. where once the first of us, Ardipithecus, walked beneath a younger moon. The world exhales. The long breath of time spreads across mountains and seas, over forests and deserts, over every living thing. It is a lullaby. Only the earth can sing a song older than thought, older than sound. The rivers quiet themselves. The animals find their rest. The stars gather above, uncountable and patient, their light falling softly upon the sleeping world. Every leaf glimmers in the faintest glow, every shadow deepens into peace. The air is cool now, clean, tender. It smells of rain and soil, of the long memory of creation. And in that stillness, the story returns, not to begin again, but to settle, to rest, to dream. For every story must eventually close its eyes, even one that spans the whole of time. The world we came from, the world of Ardipithecus, still lives within us. When we breathe the same air that once filled her lungs. When we walk, the rhythm of her steps echoes quietly in our bones. When we gaze at the horizon, we repeat her first act of wonder, the ancient gesture of looking outward and seeing possibility. We have crossed millions of years, and yet we are still her continuation. The same spark passed from hand to hand, from heartbeat to heartbeat. Listen, you can almost hear it beneath the pulse of your own blood. The slow rhythm of the earth, turning the faint murmur of ancient rivers, the deep hum of existence itself. It is all one sound. It is all one story. Ardipithecus no longer walks beneath the sun, yet she has never vanished. She sleeps in the strata of stone in the fossils that rest like sacred text within the earth's quiet libraries. But she also lives invisibly, intimately in us. In the tilt of our heads, in the curiosity of our gaze, in the quiet tenderness that makes us human. We are her reflection, her dream continued. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine her world. The air thick with warmth, the trees rising like pillars of breath, the grasses moving in the rhythm of wind and sunlight, the smell of fruit, the murmur of water, the distant calls of life unnumbered. The world before noise, before words, before time had weight. It is not gone. It sleeps beneath our cities, beneath our stories, beneath the steady turning of our thoughts. That world is still here, in the hush between heartbeats, in the soft silence after rain, in the quiet moments when you forget yourself and simply are. That is the oldest language of life. That is the lullaby the earth has been singing since the first dawn. Now, as the stars drift higher, the boundary between past and present blurs. The air itself seems to hold memory. Each gust of wind that brushes your skin might once have brushed hers. Each drop of water that cools the sea might once have fallen upon her face. In this vast continuum, nothing is lost. Everything moves, changes, returns. Even we are not apart from this cycle. We are not separate from the deep intelligence that shaped it. We are participants in the breathing of the cosmos, a single inhale, a single exhale stretched across eternity. And as you listen now to your own breath, to the faint sound of your heart, you are listening to that same rhythm that guided every creature before you. The night deepens, the firelight fades. Above, the constellations wheel, slowly tracing patterns older than any story ever told. Long before we named them, they were watching. Long before thought found words, they had already seen the unfolding of our kind. Ardipithecus once looked upon them too, perhaps from a high branch or an open plain. Her eyes, dark and soft, caught their reflection. She did not name them, but she felt them, that same pull of wonder, that same quiet knowing that the lights above and the life below were one and the same. It was the beginning of awe, and awe is the first step toward peace. Now, as you drift in the gentle rhythm of that thought, let the boundaries of time dissolve. Let the story slow. Let the words become lighter, softer, as if carried on the breath of the earth herself. The pulse of life is all around you, steady, ancient kind. Imagine the slow turning of the planet beneath the sky, continents breathing, oceans sleeping, clouds moving in silence. every motion connected to every other, every living thing part of a single unbroken flow. Even the stars, though distant, are bound to this motion, each light a heartbeat in the great body of the universe. Now, within that vast stillness, see yourself not as one, not as separate, but as part of that eternal body. You are the river, you are the tree, you are the wind that moves through the grass. The atoms of your hands once belonged to mountains, to oceans, to creatures long vanished. You have lived 1,000 lives before this one, and you will live 1,000 more in forms you cannot yet imagine. The story of Ardipithecus was only the beginning of a single thought, the universe learning to look at itself through the eyes of life. And that thought continues still through you. You are her memory, extended her question still unfolding. Every time you wonder, every time you love, every time you gaze at the world with quiet awe, you are continuing her prayer. The earth turns gently. The night folds deeper. The stars shimmer like breath on water. And somewhere within this vastness, the story you have been listening to is no longer about her or even about us. It is about everything. Every heartbeat, every spark, every silence. The song of existence sung softly into the infinite. Listen closely now. There is a rhythm beneath everything, a pulse that moves through the veins of the soil, through the tides, through your own quiet breathing. It is the sound of life continuing, the sound of the universe dreaming itself awake. And as that rhythm slows, so too does the story. The words begin to drift like leaves on water. The images fade into the soft haze of memory. What remains is feeling a calm, vast awareness of belonging. The kind of peace that asks for nothing, expects nothing, simply is. The first dawn that touched Ardipithecus has long since passed, yet its light still shines, carried forward in the eyes of every creature that followed. That same dawn now rests quietly in you, in the warmth of your breath, in the stillness of your chest, in the slow, patient beating of your heart. The same earth that once lifted her from the forest floor now holds you endlessly, without judgment, without haste. You are part of her. You always have been. Every dream you've ever had is the dream of the earth remembering herself. Every thought is the echo of that first awakening. Every breath is the continuation of that first stirring in the silence. Now let yourself rest in that understanding. There is nowhere else to go, nothing else to become. The journey has always been circular, from silence to motion, from motion to awareness, from awareness back to silence again. In this moment, the circle completes itself. The story returns to the stillness from which it began. The earth turns once more beneath you, the stars move slowly above, and time folds inward, gathering all things into its gentle embrace. The rivers dream of the sea, the trees dream of the sky. And you dream of the beginning, when everything was one breath, one voice, one endless calm. The night deepens, and the light of the stars softens into quiet shimmer. The wind moves slower now, brushing against the grasses, like a whisper of remembrance. Somewhere in the distance, the faint cry of a night bird echoes, brief, serene, eternal. The earth listens, and the universe listens with her. The story is ending, but nothing truly ends. It only settles like dust after the wind, like a heartbeat after love. So sleep now, not as one who leaves the world, but as one who returns to it. Let the slow tide of the earth's dreaming carry you. Let her ancient rhythm guide your breath. Inhale the dawn of all creation. Exhale the peace of all things, returning home. Drift with her through the soft gravity of memory, through the cradle of stars, through the silence, before the first light. And as you fall into that stillness, remember this. You are older than time. You are younger than the next breath. You are the beginning and the becoming, the question and the answer, the silence and the song. The earth holds you. The stars watch over you. And the story. The story that began with the first whisper of life continues still softly, endlessly, within your dreams. Sleep now, gentle traveler of ages. You are home.